Hello and welcome, this is Mouse Gunner, and we're going to continue with Kerbal Space Program and Mouse Gunner's Quest. Now, if you missed the previous video, Mouse Gunner's Quest is to build a, essentially, space plane, a plane that's able to take off from a runway, go up through the atmosphere into space, and get a stable orbit of Kerbin, and theoretically have enough fuel to leave that orbit if we so choose. Beyond that simple, stable orbit, that's really all I'm looking for, because at least in theory, if you were able to get it into that stable orbit, you could then get a refueler craft come in, refuel it, and do more complex missions beyond that if you so choose. So that's as far as I want to go, and honestly, that's a harder task than it sounds, hence Mouse Gunner's Quest. So, in the previous video, I showed you a lot of experimental craft I have, was working on before I started my kind of quest video series, and the last time we left off, we had just finished the XAS-4. Off camera, I then did a variant of that just to see if I could get it to go a little bit better than what we saw in the video series, and I did a lot of experimentation with that to see how we could, get it to work. Unfortunately, I did do another craft, and it didn't seemingly save, but fortunately for me, it's an auto-save ship. I could have swore I saved it in another variant, but it would have been the XAS-5, unless I accidentally... Oh, there it is, X5. So I spelled it the X5 rather than XAS. That's actually a divergence from the naming system. So I did another craft kind of off camera, and we're going to ignore that for the time being, because I guess I'm just going to use the X prefix from now on because it makes it a little bit simpler on me, maybe. In any case, I made this craft off camera, and I'll be probably showing that in a future video, but the reason I'm not going to be showing it now is because I think it's a further step than what we're going to do now. But it also taught me some lessons. Why don't I just slap this on up here so you guys can see exactly what it is. And I'll do the A1 because it is the most developed of the concept. So this uses the hybrid engines, the Rapier engine that I previously discussed I thought was kind of a dead end. Well, when I did the experimentation with this craft, with the X5, not the A1, I have actually not done anything with the A1. This was just fleshing out the X5. The X5 actually made it out into space, which is something that our previous craft did not do. So, as I said, I will return to the X5A1 or the X5 in the future, but what I'd like to do is actually start from scratch, but use some of the design ideas that I used with this craft in our current craft. So let's go ahead and work on this. So the idea behind this craft is that it's kind of simpler is better. Lighter is better is probably the best way to describe it. So what I'm going to do is, previously we have been using this cockpit. I'm going to use this cockpit instead. Now I understand it is heavier slightly, but also we had like a nose section and what have you on this version that I don't want to do quite the same. I think that adds on quite a bit of weight, having that nose section. So this in overall totality is going to be less weight. Now we're going to start giving it some fuel tanks. We're going to go ahead and use the RCS fuel tank here, as that is an important, kind of thing that I need to do, is also have controllability in space. It's one of the essentially restrictions on the build that I have placed on myself. Then, oh wait, I still want fuel tanks. I want 2 of the liquid fuel tanks, because we're going to continue using liquid fuel engines. This is probably going to be the last experiment with the liquid fuel engines, honestly. But my idea is that I'm only going to use this atomic rocket motor, rather than try and use a jet engine that uses intake air and the atomic rocket motor together, I'm just going to use the atomic rocket motor. Now, one of the reasons I didn't do that before is because I was really concerned with the fuel consumption of this this engine, and as well as its low power output in atmosphere, that it wouldn't be enough. But we're going to have to find that out, because honestly, I think the multi-engine setup is just too heavy. So now we have our fuel tanks. We're going to need wings, but we're going to also use these wings, which also have the capacity to have fuel. So we're going to slap those on. And this is going to be kind of like a flying wing kind of setup. So it's just going to use these two wings and no real tail section. We're going to also need our elevators, which are a little tricky to put on. And I think what I need to do is get this. And sometimes it takes a little bit of a while for me to figure out how to place it. It's like you have to place it just so to get it to take it. I think this is the section I want to actually have. I was able to get this to work on the X5. I might actually have to do this off of camera because it's like really tricky to get it to... Oh, there we go. Okay, that's exactly what I want. I almost had it. Bring that in. There we go. It looks like you have to have this angle snap set for it to... Oh no, that's not... I want this one, which I think is the tip. Yeah, you have to have the angle snap for this to go on right. I kind of figured this out when I was doing the X5 build, which, as I said, helps me out for this build. And then we're going to need a at least one tail piece, and we'll slap that on here. It's a little far forward and also not straight. There we go. But unfortunately, you can't place anything on the atomic rocket motor. It doesn't. It's not a valid placement point, and it's kind of annoying that it isn't. I mean, technically, you would think you'd be able to place it here, but it just doesn't let you. But that's okay. And just making sure I put it on straight. Okay, so we have kind of our basics. What we need now is some landing gear, and we're probably going to do the same kind of setup that we did with the XAS4. And honestly, just saying X5 is easier to say than XAS5, for instance. And one of these days I need to look up the camera controls for the builder, because sometimes it's a little bit tricky to get camera going. And you know what I'm going to have to probably do here is put the landing gear on the wings, because again, that atomic rocket motor isn't a valid placement point. The only problem with this is it may have a little bit of issues with essentially bumping its butt on the ground back here. But also, being at that angle, though, allows it to take off before you get to the end of the runway. So it is kind of an advantage in the same at the same time as being kind of weird. Okay, finally, what we need to do is, before I forget, make sure I add fuel to the wings, as that is an important step. If you don't do that, these wings start with no fuel, and we definitely need the fuel. Oop, not that. There we go. And because these are linked together, it should put fuel in the other wing, just like so. Okay, so I think we have our basic craft. So all we need to add to this to get it to work is some of these thrusters, the RCS thrusters. So do the angle snap, because I feel like that's the best way to get these things to go on straight. Put some there. I'll put some here. Although it's not quite straight, I just have a lack of places to put this. And then finally, we'll put one up here and one on the... I probably should put it in the middle of the craft. But the idea is that it rotates it, though. So I guess front is a good place to put it. And we'll probably put the other one on the bottom in the rear. That way it kind of balances itself out. Alright, and that's probably going to be it for this craft. As I said, simpler is better, lighter is better. Hopefully it's stable. The one thing we have to worry about is center of mass, center of lift, which are not aligned, which is going to cause some problems if we don't do anything about it. So we're going to go ahead and move the wings, trying to get it a bit more stable. So about there. Fortunately, that is covering up our RCS motors, so I'm going to have to move those ahead of time. Just place them over there for now. Okay, let's balance our weight here. This is a very important step. If you don't do this, you're going to have problems later. It's going to make our craft a little funky because the wings are a little bit too far forward visually, but we kind of have to live with that. And there is our thrusters. Okay, so it looks a little bit funky, but that's okay. And the other thing is, because we don't have the intake air thrusters, we don't need intake air. Did I put the wings on straight? It looks like I did. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with what we have here, so we'll go ahead and name it. We'll name it the X6. We'll just go with that naming convention of just the X for experimental. As XAS is kind of harder to say, and secondly, that's what I did with the X5. So there we have it. Alright, so I don't think I'm forgetting anything, although there's always that possibility. Oh, parachutes. I like to always put parachutes on. And the reason I do that is kind of for emergency landings in case I need to. Now, typically I use the radial mounts because on the fuselage, as I don't really trust putting them on the wings. I've had instances where I would put parachutes on the wings, and all that would happen is the wings would get ripped off, and then the craft would plummet to the earth and well, Kerbal, I guess, rather than the earth, and explode, and the poor Kerbal would die. So that's probably what we're going to do, and of course we're going to create a different stage for our rocket motor. Okay, now we should be good. Let's go ahead and save that up and launch. And I did discover that essentially that SAS pod in the front of the craft is completely and totally useless. Well, it's not useless, but it adds some functionality, but it's not. There's not a point to it as far as SAS goes. You get SAS regardless. Again, I would love if they communicated to you what exactly allowed you to get the SAS. Okay, so we're going to be launching here in a second. I just want to pull up my fuel, and that is my main concern with this, is the fuel. Also, whether or not we have enough power, because as you can see, there's not a whole lot of thrust coming out of the back of this with just the one rocket motor. As we are barely moving, we might need all of the runway to do this. This is kind of why I was using the dual setup with a jet engine paired with this, but the problem with that is the only way to get it balanced was to essentially have 3 engines. You have the 2 jet engines and the 1 rocket engine, or 2 rocket engines and 1 jet engine. Any other setup is unbalanced as far as thrust goes and will cause you to not have very stable flight. And it looks like we are getting close to maxing out the speed of this engine at this altitude, which shows us that this setup is pretty much not really all that valid. We tried to go with as light as we possibly could, and clearly this is not enough power. I mean, we're barely moving here. And I have a feeling once we get to the end of the runway, it's going to be a bit of an accident, as we're only going 35 meters a second, which, although we have a lot of lift with our wings, I doubt is fast enough. And, oh, wow, we actually did make it off. I am very surprised, actually. only problem is now our acceleration is plummeting because I'm actually, yeah, that might have been a mistake. It looks like we're about to end up in the ocean. Oh boy, let's put our landing gear back out. Too late. Ah, let's hit our parachutes. And hit our brakes because it looks like our landing gear survived. Yay, we lived! Well, looks like I have to lock those brakes in, so there we go. Alright, well, we lived, but unfortunately, as you saw there, we had almost no speed coming off the runway, and as soon as I kind of tried to get lift, you know, essentially pull up, I killed all the speed that we had, and we fell. Now, technically speaking, I could do this and just fly straight, and eventually maybe I'd build up enough speed to do something. But even then, all right, just for you know, the sake of saying that I did this to the best of my ability, I am also going to speed through this, though, because that was kind of boring watching it trundle down the runway. Alright, let's speed this up. Is it me, or does that look lopsided to you? Looks like speeding it up was not a good idea, because it is not maintaining straight flight. Oh well, we'll just go with it. Alright, let's slow her down so we can get... Alright, see, I'm not hitting any controls, and you can see how the acceleration is starting to drop. Also, it's not flying very straight. I'll try and correct that. Yeah, okay, so I'm not hitting any controls. Not trying to pull it up or anything. You can see that the speed's starting to slow down. And also the altitude is starting to drop. And looks like we're in trouble here. And into the ocean we go. So, completely... complete failure, and now you know why I was pairing essentially jet engines with that rocket motor, because you really need to be higher in the atmosphere to get the full potential out of that motor. The only problem is you have to pair it with another engine, and from what I've seen, to have balanced thrust, you have to pair it with two engines, and then once you do that, you have such a heavy craft that it doesn't work. It doesn't have enough thrust to propel the craft. Now, if we had this sized craft higher in the atmosphere when that rocket motor went off, maybe it would work, but low atmosphere wise, this craft just doesn't work. It doesn't have enough power to go beyond the 36 meters per second, which is just awful, and you're not going to get really much out of it with that. So let's go back to our space plane hangar. And I think that's going to pretty much call an end to this video. I just wanted to essentially have a last-ditch effort with the liquid fuel engines to see if this was something that we could do. And from what I've seen, it just doesn't work. You can't do a system that uses just liquid fuel engines and expect to escape the atmosphere. You just don't have enough power to do it. Not unless I did some kind of crazy build where I had 4 or more of these rocket engines. That would probably be my last attempt at liquid fuel, would be to make a larger craft with, you know, maybe 4 of these atomic rocket motors, and still I have doubts. I have doubts that that would have enough power, because making a large craft like that would just make it all the more heavy. And the heavier you make it, the less that, anemic power is going to be able to do much. So I have a lot of doubts that will work, but essentially my idea, if I did that, were to have probably 4 of these atomic motors and then probably 2 jet engines. Use the jet engines to get off the ground, because again, these atomic motors have almost no low atmosphere performance. get it high enough that these will have, more power, and then launch them off and see if I can escape the atmosphere by doing that. But even then, I have doubts that will work, and that's a very complex build. But in any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. In the next video, I will probably take a look at the X5, show off how much better the X5 is than pretty much everything else we've seen so far. So I hope you look forward to that video. This is Mouse Gunner, signing out.